Joe Kittinger, an unsung hero, written by Ned Jensen. Focus question: why is Joe Kittinger considered an unsung hero? Words to know: accelerated, hostile, aeronautics, invaluable, altitude, near fatal, cosmonaut, obsessed, angulated, solitary, gondola, stratosphere. Introduction 4. Jumping Joe 6. Joe sets another record 14. More records for Joe 19. Conclusion 21. Glossary 23. Index 24. Introduction. Space exploration has many heroes. If you were asked to name a few, you might mention Yuri Gagarin, the first person to travel to space, or Neil Armstrong, the first person to walk on the moon, or you might name Alan Shepard, John Glenn, or Sally Ride, all well-known American astronauts. But you probably would not include Joe Kittinger on your hit list. He is an unsung hero. However, many people regard Joe as a true pioneer of space explorations. Joe Kittinger was neither an ordinary space explorer nor an actual astronaut or cosmonaut. However, what Joe did probably took more courage than that of any astronaut who climbed into space shuttles or capsules and rocketed into space. What did Joe do was so extraordinary? Let's find out. Jumping Joe. Before humans were zooming into space in rocket-propelled capsules, Joe Kittinger was flying high-altitude air balloons to the very edge of space. It was all part of a U.S. Air Force project called Project Manhunt. The project's purpose was to test what would happen to humans who spent a long time in conditions similar to those found in outer space. In June 1957, Joe made his first balloon flight in the stratosphere and reached an altitude of 29,565 meters, 97,000 feet. He was aloft for almost 7 hours. The information gathered from high-altitude balloons flights by Joe and others was invaluable to NASA's planning for the first human space flights. Later, Joe was the engineer of Project Excelsior, a U.S. Air Force project to develop safe ways to escape from high-altitude aircraft and spaceships. In August 1960, a year before Russia cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person considered to travel into space, Joe Kittinger accomplished an equally incredible feat. He rode in a balloon filled with helium gas over to a distance of 31,333 meters, 102,800 feet above Earth. A typical passenger jet flies about 19,144 meters, 30,000 feet. Above Earth, Joe went more than 3 times higher than a passenger jet fly in a balloon. Okay, so that's pretty incredible, isn't it? But get this. Next, Joe stepped out of the balloon at 31,333 meters, 102,800 feet above Earth. He stepped out of the open gondola to emptiness of space. He wasn't going for a spacewalk. Instead, he jumped and began falling back to Earth. Do you know, Joe piloted 93 different types of aircraft that included planes and balloons. He flew 5,300 hours in jet plane flight, about 1,000 hours flying combat missions. He parachuted 101 times, with 3 of those jumps from the balloon at very high altitude. Before we learn what happened to Joe, let's think about the conditions 31,333 meters, 102,800 feet above Earth. At that altitude, the air is very thin, which makes it next to impossible to inhale enough oxygen with each breath. Joe carried a supply of oxygen, which allowed him to breathe comfortably. However, it is incredibly cold that high above Earth. At the 32 kilometers, 20 miles distance Joe traveled in his balloon, he was deep into a layer of atmosphere called stratosphere. This layer stretched from 9.5 to 48 kilometers, about 6 to 30 miles above Earth. So Joe was floating well into the stratosphere, where temperatures can be as low as negative 68 Celsius, negative 90 Fahrenheit. To keep himself warm in these hostile conditions, Joe wore several layers of clothing. He also needed to wear a special pressurized suit to prevent his body from exploding and his blood from boiling. The danger of this happening was caused by low pressure conditions of space, where very little air exists. In space, pressure inside the body is much greater than pressure outside the atmosphere, which pushes against the body. This can, at an altitude of 18,900 meters, 62,000 feet, which is known as Armstrong's limit. Despite all the measures taken to keep Joe safe, he experienced pain in his right hand when the pressurized glove he wore developed a leak and lost pressure. Math minute. When Joe jumped from his high altitude balloon at 31,000 meters, he was in a free fall for 4 minutes and 36 seconds before his parachute opened. He was 5,500 meters when the chute opened. What was his average speed in meters per second during his fall? Answer. 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 About 95 meters per second. Let's continue to follow Joe in his amazing fall through the atmosphere. He was being pulled by gravity back home to Earth. As he fell, his body accelerated, reaching speeds of over 965,000 kilometers, 600 miles per hour. Some experts say that he even broken the sound barrier. If so, he was the only person to break the sound barrier unaided or unprotected by any sort of craft for over 50 years. After falling for 16 seconds, Joe's small 1.8 meters, 6-foot diameter drogue parachute opened and slowed his fall. A drogue parachute is angulated and thinner than regular parachute. This design stopped the parachute from being torn apart during high-speed falls from high altitudes. Joe fell for another 4 minutes and 36 seconds before his main parachute opened, allowing him to drift slowly down to Earth. Joe has proven that humans could survive in near space-like conditions outside a spacecraft or aircraft after an emergency escape. You might ask whether Joe was really in space. Technically speaking, he was not. Space really does not have any well-defined border. It's not like stepping across the border of one country to another. The atmosphere just keeps getting thinner and thinner as you move away from Earth. However, many scientists define the border of space called Kármán line as 100 kilometers, 62 miles above Earth. So it would appear that Joe didn't actually reach the true outer space. Nonetheless, the high was enough to experience conditions similar to those in space. And remember, he wasn't even inside a spaceship. Joe's daring jump set an altitude record for a parachute jump that remained unbroken until 2012.